And we're in such a spiral of debt now that if they were to hike the interest rates, I mean, the house of cards would immediately collapse, right? I mean, you basically are just keeping that bubble growing bigger and bigger and bigger. And speaking of the government bailouts, I love what you talked about in the book. I never really thought about the FDIC as being a negative thing because obviously you put your money in the bank. You don't even, like you mentioned, you don't even think about where you put your money in the bank. You put your whole life savings in any of the big name institutions. You do less research than you would buying your phone or your TV because the FDIC insures a certain amount, but it allows banks to take very risky behavior because they know that they're going to be bailed out, right? So can you talk a little bit about how the things that seem great on the surface, the subsidies, the government-backed student loans, the government-backed mortgages, all of this is actually allowing banks to become richer and richer, for investment bankers to become, among the wealthiest society members. And it's really actually going to fall on the middle class because as soon as they take too much risk and need to be bailed out, the federal government is just going to go into more debt doing that.
Yeah, there's a concept called moral hazard that, a lot of people in government have no understanding of. I mean, people understand it in insurance. I mean, the insurance industry understands moral hazard. I mean, let's say, you have automobile insurance. The minute you have automobile insurance, you may drive a little bit more recklessly because you have insurance. If you had no insurance at all, you're going to be extra careful because you're on the hook for all the damage, right? Your behavior is always going to change. Look at the government with subsidized flood insurance. Why do a lot of people build in flood zones? Because the government subsidizes their flood insurance. If there was no government subsidy, flood insurance would be a lot more expensive. And so not as many people would want to live in areas that are prone to floods. But because the government comes in and says, no, you can get insurance that's below what the market would be. Now we have people building in flood zones. And so now every time there's a flood, there's a lot of damage. But without the government, people wouldn't be building in those flood zones, so we wouldn't have to worry about it. So the government creates the problem with the subsidy. Same thing happens with student loans. Before the government got involved in student loans, college was cheap. Yep. I mean, it wasn't free, but it wasn't prohibitively expensive. I mean, my father and all of his friends, worked their way through college. And what my dad did was he had a summer job. That was it. He waited tables during the summer and he earned enough money over the summer to pay for his tuition, room and board because his parents were, middle class, lower middle class. Or my dad would say he didn't know if he was upper, lower or lower middle, but he came from a relatively, not an affluent community in New Haven. And most of his friends, their parents didn't pay for their college. But if you were more affluent, if you came from upper middle class, upper class, your parents could easily afford your college. They didn't have to save for it. It wasn't that expensive. I mean, in terms of, your income, and maybe it was 1 month's income or it wasn't that big a deal. But what happened was the politicians, went to this, to get the votes of the students because they lowered the voting age down to 18, in the 60s. So now you have a bunch of students. And here's what the politicians basically told the students to get their votes. Why should you have to work all summer? This is time to enjoy yourself. You're young, go out, go to the beach, go to parties, have fun. It's not fair that you got to wait tables all summer just to pay for college. Why don't the government loan you the money to go to college, right? So that you can party it up. And then when you get out of college and get your great job, pay us back, right? Because you're going to make more money. Why take some cruddy, waiter job? You'll get a job as a professional and you'll be making much more money. And so that's when you should pay for college, when you've got, a high income, not now, right? So that was kind of the deal. And so the government starts guaranteeing these loans. Now, without the government guarantees, none of the students would have been able to get a loan because no bank would be dumb enough to make the loan to an 18-year-old that has no assets, right? So the government starts guaranteeing the loans. Now, the colleges, they're not stupid. They know, wait a minute. So these kids can go borrow money from the government to pay the tuition? Well, we're going to raise the tuition. Mm-hmm. And so the students didn't give a damn about the tuition going up because, well, they were just getting the money from the government. So now the colleges began competing on who has the nicest dorms, who has the nicest athletic program, because, it didn't matter what it cost because it was all being paid for by the government. And so as the prices kept going up, the government kept saying, well, now we need to guarantee even bigger loans because the tuition is going up, not realizing that it's the loans that are causing the tuition to go up. And so it's a process that continued. And now, it costs a fortune to go to college. Kids are graduating with enormous amounts of debt. Nobody graduated with student debt in the 1930s or 40s or 50s. I mean, it didn't exist, but people still went to college back then. Now, not as many people went to college because you didn't need to, because a high school degree was all you needed for most jobs. But now, because the government has got every idiot going to college, now you need a college degree for what you used to be able to, job with a high school degree. So now people are staying in school for a master's degree or PhD, and they're borrowing hundreds of thousands more. I mean, the only beneficiaries of student loans are the colleges and the universities and the people who work for them, right? Those are the beneficiaries. The students got nothing. All that happened is now they have an expensive degree that has no value, and they have a huge debt. Mm-hmm. And when you see all these politicians, these liberal politicians, this is terrible that the students have all this debt. Yes, and it's because of government that they got all the debt. This is not capitalism. Under capitalism, none of these students would have been able to borrow any money. And so the colleges would have had to keep the tuitions really low so that people could actually afford to go. And then the only people who would go to college are people that actually could benefit. I mean, now you have people going to college that barely even graduated high school. In fact, they only graduated because they're not allowed to flunk them. You have people entering freshman year in college. They can't even read. They're functionally illiterate, and they start off in college with remedial reading, remedial math. Why are these people even in college? Because it's free. Because otherwise they wouldn't even go. But so we need people that just pay for college, write the check, and they're not going to go there unless there's value, right? They're not just going to go through the motions. So we don't need everybody to have a college degree. That's a bunch of nonsense. In fact, there are a lot of people that don't even have high school degrees that earn a lot more money than people with college degrees because they actually have a trade. Mm-hmm. They're a mechanic, they're a tailor, they're a carpenter, they do air conditioning, or they can fix stuff. I mean, anytime something goes wrong in your house and you're looking at how much money you're spending to fix it up, right? These guys that are coming there doing the repairs, they don't have any college degrees.
Yeah.
The people that have college degrees, waiters, they all got college degrees. I mean, what do you need a college degree to wait on tables?